Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this presentation entitled Dispelling the Myths of PTSD. I'm Dr. David Urso. Actually, I'm a USDA employee. I am an investigator with the Administrative Investigations and Compliance Branch for APHIS. I also used to work for the department, but I'm out in Riverdale presently. The reason that I'm sitting here today, and you're probably asking why I'm qualified to be lecturing you on PTSD, is I am a clinical psychologist. I worked for many years with the Veterans Administration. I am a disabled veteran myself. Not to give away my age, but I stem back from Vietnam, so I'm an oldie but goodie. One of the many tasks that I had working for the Veterans Administration was working on the post-traumatic stress disorder units at the North Chicago VA Hospital and the Salisbury, North Carolina VA Hospital. I also worked simultaneously, which back in pre-9/11, federal employees were also able to be part of emergency response teams, federal emergency response teams, and in my case, with the U.S. Public Health Service. I was working for the VA. I graduated from school in 2000. And I was immediately hired by the VA. I did my residency with the Veterans Administration, and they hired me straight out of school. And in May of 2001, I joined that U.S. Public Health Service emergency response team that I mentioned earlier. And as you might remember, just a few months later, September 11, 2001, the planes hit the World Trade Center. And I was sitting at my condominium in Chicago, and I knew that phone was going to ring at the time, or in short order. And as I conjectured, the phone did ring. Dealing with post-traumatic stress, especially starting with the World Trade Center, the command personnel who direct those emergency responses to those incidents, they didn't know how to use us. And very much truth to this day, managers don't know how to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. You've got thousands of veterans returning from active duty, veterans who were just reservists, were part of National Guard units. Not all of them were part of active duty military service. But the difference between my military service back in Vietnam and the military service that's going on presently in Afghanistan and in Iraq was the veterans of present day are constantly getting redeployed. When I was in Vietnam, if you were drafted, you had to serve 12 months, and that was carved in stone that after 12 months you would return home and you were out of the service with no further obligation. In my case, I enlisted. I was actually a high school dropout at 17 when I went to Vietnam, and I served a 4-year commitment. But after the 4 years, I was done with military service. There was no further obligation. Again, that's not the way that the veterans of these wars in the Middle East today are being treated. And actually, that's exacerbating the volume of veterans coming back who are suffering from PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Those constant redeployments are not helping. let me define what post-traumatic stress disorder is, and it's basically a type of anxiety disorder. Some of the more common symptoms are recurrent memories, intrusive memories, and there's other symptoms that include memory deficits, forgetting, startle response, hypervigilance. There's a number of symptoms that go along with PTSD. Some of the goals for today are going to be about awareness and education about what PTSD is. I'm going to tell you the basic knowledge of PTSD and some of the interventions that are taken, some of the common signs and symptoms of PTSD, and the consequences of traumatic stress. Now, there's one slide in here that's entitled, Who May Get Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder? I am going to be harping this concept at the beginning of this presentation, throughout the presentation, and until the very end. PTSD is not something solely given to veterans. And I want to emphasize that, and I want to stress that, and I'm going to pound that into everyone's brain during this presentation. PTSD, again, is not a veteran's thing. But when I talk to managers here at USDA, and as I've lectured at other agencies, managers are scared when they hear or see someone who comes to them applying for a job, applying for a promotion. They get scared if they find out that that person, that employee, has PTSD. And there's no justification for it. What you see oftentimes on the media, they illustrate, well, there was a mass shooting. Person's a veteran, he has PTSD. They assimilate all those phrases together, and it couldn't be any more untrue. Car accident victims, victims of crime, people in disasters, soldiers in combat, rescue workers. Going back to what I was talking about when I joined that U.S. Public Health Service emergency response team. I deployed to 2004. There were 4 hurricanes that hit Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. I think Hurricane Jean was one of them. Wilma was another one. But they devastated neighborhoods all over Florida. I think the first hurricane entered Florida through down in South Florida called Punta Gorda. It was on the Gulf side of Florida. And we were headquartered, FEMA set up a base station in Lakeland, Florida, and basically we would drive to all the devastated areas. And cell towers, you'd be driving down the highway and cell towers would be curled up like a pretzel. Unbelievable that entire neighborhoods, subdivisions were just, the houses were toppled. Every day I would go out with the urban search and rescue teams, mostly made up of firemen and engineers. I know the DC area, Fairfax, and several other fire departments have established task forces and that's all they do is they go through neighborhoods that have been devastated, and basically they look for bodies to see if anyone's still left alive, or finding those who are deceased. But there would always be a psychologist with these urban search and rescue teams. And not only were we dealing with the those of whom lived through hurricanes and other natural disasters, but we were also dealing with the rescue workers who were looking at these deceased individuals who we would find in toppled subdivisions. Again, that last story I said, did I even mention the word veteran? Not at all. PTSD is not a veteran's issue. I spent 20 years of my life as a special agent with the U.S. Treasury Department. I worked drugs. I've been involved in investigating murders. More times than not, there were witnesses to those violent crimes. Those people ended up, in many cases, with post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, the word veteran didn't even enter into that scenario. And everybody who goes through a traumatic event doesn't end up with PTSD. I wrote a paper years ago when I was still going through my schooling, and I was conjecturing about why some people get PTSD and others don't. And the point that I was trying to make, because there was a correlation between, at the time when I was working with veterans, I was looking at the type of veteran that was coming through my hospital unit. And one thing that I noticed, there were far less officers than there were enlisted persons that were coming in and seeking treatment at the PTSD units at the VA hospitals. Now again, this is a theory that I had. This is not something that's ever been proved, but it was, again, my observation that there were less officers coming through than there were enlisted men and women. I see a couple people here in the audience. Would anybody like to tell me why do you think that was? Ma'am? Sir? What about you?
I would think because of the nature of the role they play.
Okay. In what way?
In enlisted, I don't know a lot because I'm not military.
Mm-hmm.
But I envision enlisted is more front lines and officer is more direct.
Okay. That's very good. Ma'am, you?
Yeah, I agree with that, and also I'm assuming that officers are in the back at the base or at another station. They're not actually out in the battle.
Okay, very good. Okay, first of all, the officers that are enlisted, in a combat unit, they'd both be on the front lines, okay? But the theory that I came up with when I was looking at this issue was the fact that the officers were required to have a college degree. And I knew this, but you never know about an enlisted person. There were college-educated enlisted people, but the vast majority of them, at least during Vietnam, either did not have a degree or barely had a high school education. And as I looked into the issue further in my research, most of the people that were coming into my unit, both in North Chicago and at the Salisbury, North Carolina VA, they were all either had a high school education or less. And that's why I wasn't seeing a lot of officers. And the conclusion of the paper that I wrote was the fact that when you go through college and you have to take all these courses, and which ultimately lead to a degree, you have a vast amount of information that's presented to you in any curriculum, and it requires you to process that information and think theories out, formulas in math, in other subjects. And that's what I thought was lacking from the enlisted people, was that process, or that dynamic of processing information and thinking things out and thinking these through. And that's one of the dynamics of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm going to give you an illustration that you could sort of visualize within your own minds. Usually when someone is having a moment, someone's suffering from full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder, and with someone who, whether you've been in a car accident, a victim of violent crime, or you're a veteran, you get these moments where you just enter back into that moment, that split second, or those moments where you were being traumatized. Again, whether it's a car accident or when someone's getting assaulted sexually or otherwise, they have these, they re-experience in these moments that particular moment when they were traumatized. And if someone was probably my age, and I'm in my early 60s, but back when I was in school, in grade school, we used to have the teachers show us movies, and they used to bring out the reel-to-reel projector. Does anybody remember those from school? The film would get stuck inside, and you'd still be looking at the screen, and that same frame would just be clicking and reintroducing itself on the screen. And that's what PTSD is like. We're playing a movie inside of our brains, and when we have that experience, that moment where we're re-experiencing that trauma, it's like that film getting stuck inside the projector. And you're just stuck on that one moment, and you can't seem to crawl out of that moment of trauma that person experienced. And that's what PTSD is like. And as a therapist, as a psychologist or a social worker, that's what we try to do. We're the little technician, the audio-visual technician that used to come in the classroom and unstick that film from inside that projector so the movie could continue on and play, and you'd see the whole movie and it would come to an end. With PTSD, unless you have some sort of intervention, unless you have that psychologist sitting there, or you've learned some tools through therapy, your mind is going to get stuck, just like that film was getting stuck inside that projector. And that's what PTSD is all about. And as a therapist, we try to unstick that. Now, looking at the slide, origins of post-traumatic stress disorder. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Middle East. The term PTSD was never even penned until Vietnam. That's when the Veterans Administration came out with that term. Let's go to the one that says History of Combat Stress. There you go. Soldier's heart. Shell shock. You see these terms? Battle fatigue. In the World War II entry, you see the word hysteria neurosis syndrome. And I gave a presentation earlier this month, and I'm going to introduce this little story again. When I was working at the North Chicago VA hospital, one of my side jobs or duties as a psychologist, we used to have veterans that used to come in applying for disability compensation. And depending upon what they were seeking disability compensation for, whether it was a physical injury or mental health injury, I obviously was called in to do any psychiatric issues that came in. And there was a elderly gentleman and his wife who came in. This gentleman, as I looked at his medical file, he was probably in his mid to late 80s. Hadn't, up until this point in his life, hadn't displayed any sort of symptoms at all. He's mid to late 80s. No symptoms at all up until this point of any issues involving post-traumatic stress disorder. So I came, I read his medical file, which is about like a New York telephone book. And as I was reading, come to find out that he was a member of an air crew on a bomber going towards Germany on a bombing mission. All the planes in the formation that he was flying in started receiving heavy flak. The planes, most of them were all torn up, hadn't even reached their target sites yet. The plane that he was flying on, shrapnel was flying through the aircraft, right and left. They would come up from below and exit out through the top of the aircraft. That's how bad the flak was. This gentleman, as an aircrew member, he got hit with some flak. He was hit in the head, rendered unconscious. Rest of the crew, again, they hadn't even reached their target site yet. Didn't know what to do with this guy. There was no doctors on board to give him any sort of first aid. So they put a parachute on him and pushed him out the door over Germany in the pitch of dark. He landed in a field, wasn't captured by German soldiers as you might think, but he was actually captured by the local townspeople around there. They started to string this guy up. They were going to lynch him on the spot. A German soldier who was in a local bar came stumbling out, and he heard all the ruckus going on outside, saw what was happening, and he took this airman, this American airman, took him by the scruff of the neck and took him to the local city jail and put him in there for the night until he could be transferred to a POW camp the next day. He would have been dead. He would have been dead within minutes had that soldier not found him. When he was put in the POW camp, he witnessed the screams, and he could hear the torture of what the German soldiers were doing to the captured Russians who were in the same POW camp. This weighed on him. But one thing that we all have as humans is built into our system, in our psyche, we have defenses. And we're able to, in most cases, see and experience different things in life, and we're able to navigate through them and emotionally contain them. As we get older in life, these defenses start to break down. And that's why this gentleman in his mid to late 80s just started to experience the symptoms of PTSD so late in life. It wasn't because his trauma happened late in life, it was because his defenses that were warding off any sort of symptomology of PTSD, they just started to emerge that late in life. That's where I saw in his chart the words hysteria neurosis syndrome on an old document that dated back to World War II. They didn't know what PTSD was. PTSD at that time didn't even exist. Some of the things that have an effect on PTSD are your proximity to the trauma. Immediacy. How soon after the trauma do you seek treatment? Simplicity. Is it simple treatment? A lot of the people that I deployed with to Hurricane Katrina, to the World Trade Center, to some of the other natural disasters, especially the rescue workers, that's all they needed was rest, food, and comfort. They didn't need therapy. They didn't need to lie down on a couch. It was simple things like rest and food. Now I'm going to ask some of the other people here in the audience a question. At one of the disasters, I was working with a lot of firefighters. And as I was going to work every morning, towards the area where it was extremely devastated, I saw a fireman that I had seen. I couldn't honestly remember everyone's names, but you remember faces. And this fireman was sitting on a curb, and he had his fireman's boot off, and the boot was turned upside down. So I stopped, and everybody used to call me Doc. They all knew who I was, but I didn't remember who everybody's name was. So I sat down next to him on the curb and said, "Hey, what's going on?" I think his name was, he was Irish. He was McNulty or something like that. And I asked him, I says, "What's going on?" And he didn't say anything to me. But the words just weren't coming out. But the expression on his face, it was just something that it looked terrible. And he just handed me his boot. And I looked in his boot, and there was a fresh molar in the cleat of the boot. And the question I'm going to ask the people who are sitting here in the audience, do you think it was best to take that fireman and relieve him of duty that day? Or do you push him to go back to work after him being traumatized by what he found in his boot? Ma'am, what would you say? You think he should have been relieved? Okay. Sir, what do you think? Should you relieve him? Give him the day off?
I like that day off.
Give him the day off?
Yeah.
Okay. Both good answers. But current treatment regimens call for actually returning that person to duty as quick as possible. Military's been using it, and the treatment regimens that FEMA and other agencies are holding is that you get them back to work as soon as possible. And that's what I did that day. I put my arm around him, gave him a hug, told him to put his boot back on, and I walked him back to work. And he was fine. He was fine. I couldn't tell you years later if he came down with full-blown PTSD, but that's what we did for that day, and he functioned fine for the time that I was deployed. Consequences of traumatic stress. PTSD, obviously. Suicide, depression. Substance abuse, self-medicating. That's a big one. Problems in relationship. Pathological forms of grief. And for some people, there are no consequences, no symptoms. Some people process that trauma, like I was talking about earlier. They're able to talk themselves through it, think it through, and there's no PTSD. Many of the veterans that I treated in the past either didn't seek out treatment, or the treatment that they did get wasn't adequate enough for the amount of trauma that they experienced. Did anybody ever hear the term interstate therapy? Everyone here in the audience is saying no, they never heard of it. That's something that's very common with veterans. They couldn't hold down a relationship or a marriage. Heavily into substance abuse, drinking, and drugs. And their solution, couldn't hold down a job, so they would move from city to city. That's interstate therapy. That's them trying to treat themselves. Some of the impact on employment. We've got a lot of veterans that are being hired, not only with this agency, but all the agencies across the board. There's initiatives set up. There's quotas. Now, not every employee who comes to work for the federal government is going to walk in the front door, tell their supervisor or the people on their board who are interviewing them for the job, and declare to them, looking them in the eye, saying, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't work that way. Some managers may never find out that an employee has post-traumatic stress disorder. With the HIPAA laws the way that they are, they're not required to share that with their supervisors. Some of the symptoms that an employee may have that you as a manager may notice, or you as an employee may notice, some of your coworkers may have headaches, vertigo, balance problems, anxiety. You may hear them talking about sleep problems, nightmares, and a wealth of other symptoms. One thing that I stress to employees that I talk to, and managers and supervisors as well, is that if you are having difficulties with PTSD, traumatic brain injury, my personal recommendation is to have a confidential talk with your supervisor. You don't have to come out and say, hey boss, I have post-traumatic stress disorder, or boss, I have traumatic brain injury. You might just have a conversation with that supervisor or that manager and say, I'm having some problems remembering, or I have some problems concentrating. And you have to go into chapter and verse, but that line of communication between that employee and that supervisor, trust me, will help you out. That's why every agency has, in different terms, but they have a reasonable accommodations representative who's on staff to help you. And they can come up with interventions that might help you out and to maintain your employment without any issues, any misconduct issues or performance issues. Some of the cognitive symptoms that I talked about, again, are short-term memory deficits, poor concentration, decision-making difficulties. All these have a potential to interfere with work life and everyday activities. Not all PTSD cases are the same. Some people, even though they've gone through some form of trauma in the past will never develop post-traumatic stress disorder. These veterans that we're hiring, and again, it's not just veterans who may have post-traumatic stress disorder, but that employee who comes to work for our agency or some other agency, it's very important for you to know, as long as we're educating you today on PTSD, that that employee coming to work every day, that's a positive thing for them. That helps in their recovery, helps them maintain an income, and supports their self-esteem by coming to work every day and working just like everybody else. Social interaction is a big deal. Family support is a big deal for someone who has PTSD. Does anyone here think that only certain jobs are suited for people with PTSD? Anybody think that? There are no specific jobs best suited for anybody with PTSD. I personally know and have known FBI agents who have PTSD, firemen who have PTSD, doctors who have PTSD. There are no specific jobs best suited for someone with a disability. People with disabilities, some more obvious than others, but would you into a room, would you point them out and say, oh my God, that person has PTSD? You can't see it. It's invisible. Some interventions that help people with PTSD. Regular daily schedules. Access to memory aids such as voice recorders, PDAs, task checklists. Low levels of distracting noise and light. Having the flexibility to take regular breaks. These are all simple interventions that will allow someone with PTSD to have a full work life and a full social life. We'll talk about some of these later on when we start getting into some of the reasonable accommodations that the federal government can offer. How am I doing on time?
It is 1:41.
So we're okay? Okay. Not all people with PTSD will need accommodations on the job. When they are necessary, managers should know the workplace supports are generally low cost or no cost and simple to implement. In order for that to work, what I just said goes back to what I had said earlier. That element of communication between the employee and the manager or the supervisor is very important. You can't expect a manager or a supervisor with an invisible disability like we're talking about today with PTSD to know what's going on inside of you. You have to verbalize that. Just in case anyone is curious, me being a disabled Vietnam veteran, I have the diagnosis of PTSD. And I did have the discussion with my manager about my shortcomings. I have some memory issues, I have concentration issues, and I've learned to compensate for those through various interventions, and again, through having that talk with my manager. Managers have much to gain because successfully employing a veteran with PTSD, there are bottom line benefits from an experienced veteran, as well as their contribution to their successful recovery. What specific job tasks are problematic with an employee with PTSD? What accommodations are available to alleviate these limitations? You know who's got all the answers? Sir?
Hoping you.
I'm sorry?
We're hoping you have all answers.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I was wondering, actually, very interested in this, actually, with when a fire alarm goes off and somebody with PTSD is present, are people in danger?
Why do you think that they would be in danger?
I'm wondering, are we putting people at danger by
Them or you?
well, other people
Okay.
in the workplace,
Mhm.
should accommodations like saying, oh, we're going to have a fire alarm, so a drill, so you should telework on that day.
That was a very good question you raised. A very good question. And a lot of people probably have had that same question and never thought to verbalize it. But no. If someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder, do you think that they should be warned that they're going to have a fire alarm? Because what's the actual purpose behind a fire alarm in real life, if there was a real fire?
If there's an emergency, to go through the steps, so
To evacuate people
yeah.
safely, to get them out. You're right. To get them to an area that's safer than where a fire might be burning. But no, I would say not. You don't want to. You want people, someone who's suffering from PTSD, to be able to navigate through life without any sort of accommodation. If every time you're going to have a fire drill and you have to pick out these people who you know have PTSD, you won't always know it. So, number one, you can't warn everybody with PTSD that we're going to have a fire alarm in 20 minutes and to stay home that day. You don't want that to happen. You want them to assimilate themselves like everyone else does. You don't get notification that there's going to be a fire alarm. I don't get notification that there's going to be a fire alarm evacuation. You want them to assimilate.
Worse yet, actual fire.
Or an actual fire, right, correct. You want them to assimilate like every other employee up and down the hallway so that when you hear that fire alarm, very mechanically, you know to get up from your workstation, you know mechanically where the nearest exit is, and you know to go down the stairs and to exit the building. You want them to assimilate that into their daily lives. That person with post-traumatic stress disorder, he doesn't, in 99% of the occasions, they would not want that sort of help. They would want to be treated just like everyone else was.
So to go to the core of the question is, are people put in danger?
No. Not at all. Not at all. One of the things, in putting yourself into the shoes of someone who might have post-traumatic stress disorder, and they heard that fire alarm go off suddenly, one of the symptoms of someone with PTSD is that they have hyperarousal, their startle response is set off probably easier than the rest of us sitting in this room. And that's one thing that they might get frightened a little bit more than you and some of the other people were. But by that point in their lives that they've sought treatment, a lot of them are probably on medication if they're treating their disability the way that they should. A, by getting therapy. B, sometimes the doctor will put them on medication. That helps them with issues of what you just described. So no, nobody's in danger, them or you.
And my perspective is that, you know, I think just the rampant, you can look at data, the rampant problems that we've had not dealing effectively with veterans.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I think, a testament to the success that you're talking about.
Right, right. But also, the question that you raised, think of that same person as the fire alarm is going off, and that person sitting next to you may be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Just remember that they may not be a veteran. They may be somebody who was caught in a house fire at one point in their life, or saw their sibling burned in a building, or something like that, or even their pet. So again, I'm reinforcing that concept that not everybody with PTSD is associated with being a veteran. We'll talk about some accommodations. And Allison, if you want to chime in here if I missed something. We were actually talking about this before the presentation this morning, about some of the ways that an employee can be accommodated if they have PTSD. And one of the things, actually in talking to some of the employees that I know, I work out at Riverdale, that's where APHIS headquarters is at. And I've talked and discussed this with some of the employees around the building who have come up to me and, you know, confided in me that they had PTSD. One of the biggest complaints, a lot of employees work in cubicles rather than private offices. I've worked in both, but a lot of employees will come to work, they're a new employee, they're fresh out of the military, they're given a cubicle, they're given all their passwords and all that for their computer. They sit down at the computer and they start doing their work, and they hadn't thought about the fact that they're sitting there at their computer, they're typing at their keyboard, they're looking at their computer monitor, and all the while, the entrance to that cubicle is behind them. And remember when I was talking to you a couple minutes ago about hyperarousal and their startle responses, that PTSD individuals have to deal with that issue? They weren't thinking about, when their supervisor sat them down at their workstation, the fact that the opening to their cubicle is behind them. So, again, people with post-traumatic stress disorder don't walk around with a sign on them that says, I have PTSD. You don't know it. It's an invisible disability. So people, co-workers, could be the supervisor, somebody might come in and walk up behind that employee who's sitting at their workstation typing, and they might say something innocent, and that person with post-traumatic stress disorder is going to hit the ceiling because that person scared them by walking into their cubicle. They didn't mean harm. They didn't mean to upset that person, but something has to be done because someone with PTSD needs to know if somebody is approaching them. So one of the things that we've done, again, out of Riverdale, which I'm sure is being done all over the government, one intervention is putting a rear view mirror on top of their monitor, their computer monitor, so that they could see if somebody's coming by the entrance to their cubicle. Or they could readjust how and where that computer is set up so that no one will be able to enter that cubicle without them immediately seeing it. And that's just one intervention for someone who has PTSD. Again, we were talking about memory and concentration. There's checklists that you could use. And I'm raising my hand because I use them. I have a pad of paper, and when I have a new case that comes up, if I have an appointment that I know that I have later on in the week, it goes on that little reminder checklist that I maintain for myself. Tape recorders, white noise and environmental sound machines. Is anybody not familiar with those? Has anybody ever seen them sitting out someone's office? Okay. Schedule reminders. We were talking about this before the presentation today. There's pagers, telephones. All these have alarm clocks built into them. Stopwatches and timers for time management. Job coaches. Mentoring by coworkers or retired workers. I think that's a new thing to start. They're going to start bringing retired workers back at half salary now. Here's what I was just talking about. Desktop computer monitor mirrors to mitigate the startle response. One thing that I do, and probably one of the purposes that I'm sitting here today, is providing encouragement and moral support for people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. I have it, so I appreciate it. For someone who doesn't have it and doesn't understand it, knowing that someone who has PTSD could be a real threat. And it's been a real problem with a lot of managers and supervisors. I've actually heard it and had investigations that I investigated where managers purposely did not hire an employee because they knew the employee was a veteran. And they had this thing in their mind that that employee, if they were hired, could potentially create problems for the other employees and could be a threat to the work unit that they were being interviewed for. That is wrong. You can't get any more wrong than that. Yes, sir.
If I could say, things like this, I think directly combat that. That's because it demystifies the issue. So I applaud this thing we're having like this.
Right.
So that people that don't have PTSD can understand it better.
Right. And more people need to hear this. And that's why I'm out creating these presentations for awareness. We were talking about this earlier, and I put it in the light of, or the example of rescue workers who go out, and sometimes what will present or prevent them getting post-traumatic stress disorder or being traumatized is the fact that we give them regular breaks and provide them with food and water. Those are important if you're deployed. USDA, especially APHIS, APHIS is listed as an emergency response agency. We have people deployed presently for the bird flu outbreak that's happening all over. And that's actually been traumatizing some employees by some of the sites that they've been seeing out there by depopulating birds in mass quantities. But for an everyday employee, do you think taking breaks on a regular basis is important? You think so? We're not being traumatized. Why do we need breaks?
Everybody needs breaks
Why?
so you can perform at a higher function.
Very good. Very good. You think because you're sitting in an office here in the South Building or in the Witten Building or out in Riverdale where I'm at, you think that you don't need breaks out there? Do you need breaks?
Right now from the waterfront building.
Yeah? Sir, do you need a break
Oh,
from time to time?
I'm sorry.
No.
Talking to me?
Yeah, I'm talking to you. Yeah.
Oh, I really liked Allison's answer. I emphasize and I agree with everything she said.
Do you feel differently after you've taken a break?
I think it's part and parcel of performance.
Right. Very good. Yeah, just sticking your head outside for 2 minutes and getting some fresh air just changes your whole perspective, especially after you've been sitting through a long lecture like I'm giving you right now. Common physical signs of trauma, PTSD. Trouble sleeping. How do you think that affects someone in the course of a day if they haven't slept soundly all night? What's that going to do to your demeanor? Are you going to be in a good mood the rest of the day? Seeing some heads shaking no. You going to be able to concentrate and be on top of your game if you haven't slept all night? No, probably not. Trouble eating if you're not maintaining a good diet. If you're walking around and your stomach's grumbling all the time, how's that going to affect your work performance? You're not going to be at your optimum, are you? Some common emotional reactions, nightmares, anger, guilt. Why do you think someone with PTSD would have issues with guilt? Anybody? Allison?
Survivor's guilt?
Very good. That's it. One of the when I used to treat veterans at the North Chicago VA hospital, we used to use an intervention. It's a form of hypnosis called EMDR. And basically, we would put these patients into a trance, and we would actually bring them back to that very point in their life where their trauma occurred, which was a very emotionally dangerous thing to do. But we used to take the veteran back to that point where they were traumatized. And 8 out of 10 times, that was the source of their trauma. It wasn't about so much about what they saw or what they experienced. It was the guilt that they felt by the mere fact that they're sitting in a room with me 20 years later after the war, and they're still feeling guilty about the fact that everyone in their unit had died that day, and they were the only ones that survived. Same thing with an individual who was in a house fire that I treated. They were in a Veterans Administration hospital, but their trauma was not anything related to war. It was because they were traumatized when they were young before they even went into the military. The whole family was inside of a house, and he and another member of the family were the only two survivors of that fire. 6 or 8 people got killed that night in a house fire. And they carried that trauma through all the way into their enlistment, and they didn't start to experiencing the symptoms of PTSD until they were well into their military careers. Something in battle or something in their military experience set off their civilian trauma. Some of the things that resonate in a workplace is feeling badly about mistakes. Now, I'll bet there's not a single person in this room right now who hasn't been on the job in any given day or time and made a mistake on the job. For most people, that's not a big issue. We just shrug our shoulders, tell ourselves we made a mistake, but for someone who has PTSD, that's a big deal. Losing confidence in themselves. PTSD can develop immediately following the traumatic event, or most commonly will take weeks and sometimes years. Statistically, most of the people at the World Trade Center didn't start to exhibit symptoms of PTSD until years after. 3, 5, 6 years after the event. Family issues with someone who has PTSD. Some people have no issues at all. Some feel pressured by requests from time and attention. That's one thing that we tell people when they're deployed. Excuse me. For the first 3 days after you come home, especially for those who have been out on long deployments, in years past, sometimes deployments went up to 3 or 4 months for rescue workers. I think the federal government has learned not to deploy people that long, so they're limited to about 21 days before they're brought back and given a break. But one of the things that you don't realize, especially with USDA when you're sent out on emergency response deployments, is that who's been running the household while you've been gone? It's usually your spouse. If you're a male, it's your wife. If you're a female, it's probably your husband that's been taking care of the kids, making decisions around the house, things like that. We stress for people upon their return to spend 3 full days before you even think about making a decision about anything. Sometimes when you come home and you've been gone a long time, you've been out on deployment, your family will treat you as a child again. They're worried about you. Can I do this for you? Things like that. And that's not what the person needs. They need 3 solid days at least to decompensate and decompress from a deployment. Some things that concerns people with PTSD. Financial concerns. readjustment to work, feeling bored. And for a lot of people, it's trouble finding work. Remember when I spoke about that interstate therapy that a lot of veterans use? They can't hold down a job, let alone a relationship. They feel disconnected or detached from their family or their partner. They have an inability to tell them what had happened. Most veterans don't even talk about the horrors of war that they experienced. It's difficult for them to express happiness. Rigid discipline may no longer be appropriate for somebody like that. Difficult for them to have a relationship with their children. It's hard for people to understand the anger that you have as someone who has PTSD. It's hard for them to accept what they're feeling and how they're feeling. It's difficult for them to establish routines. Something for managers and supervisors: make use of the veterans' special hiring authorities. Communicate expectations of the position that you're hiring that employee for. Something I mentioned a couple times. Have that communication session with your boss. If you need assistance, if you need an accommodation, contact the representative from your wellness branch. There's different programs that have been set up with the federal government, not only with USDA, but other agencies. The buddy system. We have a lot of veterans that will partner up with other veterans, and they help them navigate, especially if they're a new hire, for them to navigate through the federal culture. Now, a lot of us who have been working with the federal government for a long time, it's hard for us to remember back when we first started on day one. And every agency has a different personality. I've learned that. And it takes an adjustment. Not only for a veteran coming out of the military, for anybody getting used to a new agency. I'm not going to go through all the hiring authorities, but if you're a manager or a supervisor out there who is listening, take advantage of these. This is the part that I wanted to get to. Reasons to hire a veteran. Veterans have a strong sense of responsibility. They have the ability to work under pressure. These aren't people that are coming straight out of college who have no work experience or work ethic. These are seasoned individuals, and these are all the reasons that you need to hire a veteran. They have the ability to see a task through to completion. They have strong leadership skills. They have a high degree of professionalism. They have strong problem-solving skills. They have the ability to multitask. The ability to adapt to changing situations quickly. The ability to give back to U.S. veterans by showing gratitude for their service. And hiring a veteran also has a positive impact on the image and credibility of an organization. They have technological skills and training. A lot of times that someone coming out of college will not have. They have strategic planning and foresight. Again, someone who's just coming out of college won't have that. These are just some of the reasons that a manager needs and should hire a veteran. Is there any questions? Thank you for coming and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did this help?
Very good.
Yeah. Like,
Hi everyone, I'm Todd Bedecker, Accessibility Program Manager here at the Target Center. We just wanted to show you a couple apps today and also discuss a few more. assistive technology items for PTSD and like TBI related. The first one, and the reason I just picked these two is they're available on Apple's operating system for iPads and iPhones, as well as Google's operating system, Android, on tablets and phones as well. So it's called Ptsd Coach. It's actually from the VA. And what it offers is basically, so you have these different sections: learning, which Dr. Urso went into, learn about PTSD, the healthcare options that are available for it. You'll see a section, manage symptoms. You go in there and it gives you different exercises, breathing exercises. This app also allows you to upload your own favorite images or soothing sounds to it. So when you go into the app, if you're having a particularly stressful moment, you can go in and load your favorite image and your sound, and it will play it for you. You can take a self-assessment, and when you go in there, you can rate your stress levels, and you can have certain images for certain stress levels. There's a vocal coach in there that can talk to you and say, I believe the scale is 1 to 10. So if you put it like at 8, I'm really stressed right now, a voice will play on the app, and it'll be like, go to a quiet place, sit down, relax, and it can load your image for you. It also lets you, of course, track the history of your stress levels. You can make notes to see if there's certain noises or other factors in your environment that are triggering these symptoms. And as I said before, it gives you tips on how to manage your stress. They have some stuff in there for positive imagery, like the beach, the countryside, being in the forest. And there's the soothing audio and pictures options that they have as well. And of course, they do have support tools in here. It is geared towards veterans because it is put out by the VA, but you can definitely use this as a helpful tool if you have PTSD. Now, another app I wanted to take a look at is Evernote. Now, Evernote is like a note-taking reminder tool. This is actually something that I use in the workplace. And I like Evernote because it's not as cluttered and as cumbersome as a lot of people find Microsoft Office Outlook to be. It's very simple and clean. I can go in and easily start taking a new note. So I'll just type some basic text. Oops, doesn't make sense. But so as you take a note, you can access this anywhere you basically have an internet connection. So I have this app on this iPad. I can also have it on my phone, or I can go to evernote.com and log in and see my notes as well. What's good is you can have reminders, so I can have a date. Whoops. Let me just... Of course, there it goes. So I can set reminders if I'm in a meeting and notify me if I'm having any kind of memory issues. And I can just like set this up, and this is good for just remembering if you have certain meetings, if you need to take some kind of medication, you can build in your reminders and alarms into this. And this is also free, which is good at like a basic level. There are like packages you can upgrade, but doing the basic reminders and notes in the app itself is free. Another thing, Dr. Urso mentioned some of them. There are some other assistive technology options. So you have noise canceling headphones, which is an option that we can accommodate USDA employees with. If you're bothered by loud noises or sudden noises, is definitely something that you can get. He mentioned getting a mirror. I don't know if we could necessarily get that through our partnership that we have with CAP as an accommodation, even though it seems like something so simple. But another option is if you prefer something a little less digital, you have well, I guess it's mixed digital, is a Livescribe pen and pad. So it's a paper notebook and like an actual pen, but it's also digitized, so it has like a gyroscope in it. So as you write and take notes in your notebook, it's actually recording a digital version of the text that you're writing, so you can upload your notes for later use, as well as have your paper copy. You can also use the voice recorder option on the pen as well. And of course, a lot of this is all geared towards memory loss, some of the side effects from traumatic brain injury or PTSD. So I mean, there's lots of different options out there. It's a lot of it is just going to be like what makes you comfortable, what kind of problems you're having, which brings me back to like you need to have like a needs assessment or evaluation to determine what is going to be the best option for you in your work environment. And the options that I mentioned before, I bring those up because those are all just easy to access. Some of them are free. They're easy accommodations that we can get. And they work on all the USDA networks, because sometimes there are some really great apps out there that can be used, but they may be blocked on your work phone or USDA's network. So you may want to take those on like a test trial first if there is something else. But we were just trying to cover some of the options that will work for all USDA employees and probably most federal employees as well. So that's about it. I know there were probably some people that submitted questions online. We did capture them, so we will get back to you on a person-to-person basis. If you have any other questions, you can also just email us at target-center@usda.gov. You can also go to our website and submit a request there as well. And I hope everyone found the presentation very informative today from Dr. Urso. We will share his PowerPoint presentation slides with you as well. And thank you for your time. Have a good one.